Hi, this is Dylan Gates and I'm going to talk about 10 useful principles for language teachers who want to reduce their workload and achieve better learning outcomes. And this video is aimed primarily at business English teachers, but I think will also be useful for any teacher of older learners. These principles are taken from a great book called The Minimax Teacher, Minimise Teacher Input and Maximise Student Output, which was written by Jon Taylor a long time ago in 2001, and you can buy a copy from Delta Publishing. And the key takeaway from the book, I think, is that we can achieve more by doing less as teachers, which reminds me of the Pareto Principle that states that 80% of consequences or results come from 20% of actions. In other words, we're talking about minimalizing here and fully exploiting resources and what you do in the classroom rather than wasting time on things which might not work so well. And, as I'm sure you've been told 1,000 times before, a teacher's best resource is their learners. And the first principle is simple. It's to minimize teacher input to maximize student output. And I remember being told years ago by a director of studies to reduce my teacher talking time simply because the learners needed the practice, not the teacher. And I believe this is particularly true when teaching business English or adult professionals. But I think this principle also reminds us to reduce not only what we do in the classroom, but also our planning and our feedback. So planning, implementation of the plan, and feedback. And these are three key activities for teachers. And I think we should almost consider doing an audit of our work and thinking about what can we remove, what can we reduce, and what can we delegate, not only when we plan, but also when we implement, and also when we give feedback in the classroom. So these ideas of removing, reducing, or delegating things which aren't necessary. The second principle is related to this whole concept of personalization. And adult learners bring their opinions, experience, and knowledge to the classroom, along with their creativity and imagination. So why should we plan, for example, a complex role-play activity with detailed role cards and different sequences when they could easily do the same and create their own activity, their own role-play, and work on their English in the process? In fact, why do they need to play other roles in role-play activity? Can't they just play themselves? And this saves a lot of time, saves a lot of effort, and most importantly, really reflects what our learners need to do in real life. On a related note, we teachers can have highly developed egos. Okay, we enjoy being the center of attention and having control. But how does this impact our learners' linguistic development? Perhaps rather than being a sage on the stage, imparting knowledge and dazzling them with our personalities, we should be more of a guide on the side and facilitate learning. After all, we won't be there when they use English in an interview or a tough negotiation. And I think the same applies to materials and activities. Learners can play an important role in generating content in the business English classroom. If they need to write sales copy, see what they can do. If they want to write clear and concise emails, ask them to write them themselves. Or maybe they can bring some into the language classroom and then use them for learning purposes. In fact, they can even generate activities. They probably know just as much as you do for about, I don't know, what happens in an interview. So they can design the questions. Really involve them in the whole content creation process. And this can also extend to practice and assessment activities. For example, after learning vocabulary, they could create their own Quizlet sets and test each other. Many teachers spend hours planning the perfect activity, designing materials, finding the perfect images, creating or identifying perfect texts. And then in the classroom, the learners speed through the activity in 10 minutes. Now, research from instructional design tells us that simple is often more effective when it comes to learning because it reduces cognitive overload. And the result of using simple images and having simple frameworks is that our learners have more mental energy for more productive output in order to perform the language. So things like stick figures of people, icons, infographics, simple slides mean that your learners focus more on developing their communication skills. Because after all, information is cheap. Okay? Content maybe, it needs to be well designed, but the informational value of content is now what it was, is not what it was maybe 20 years ago before the internet. And another thing to remember is that these materials you create that prove to be effective, don't throw them away, keep them. So I think by now you've worked out that I'm a fan of minimalism and in English language term, Dogme and teaching Unplugged and task-based learning. And I truly believe in simple and flexible materials that can be reused for the same purposes, maybe recycled with different levels, extended for more advanced learners, and modified to suit a variety of learner needs. So consider how you might adapt an activity, a task, or a worksheet for different purposes. For example, how could a reading article be used for speaking or writing tasks? And tasks themselves, you can often make some small changes in the task, and that keeps the students engaged, motivated, and helps them develop their English. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our role as teachers is to prepare, implement, and provide feedback. Now, these three actions are, in my opinion, key to effective teaching. And with feedback, our learners need feedback to ensure they improve, develop, and grow. Now, although they may expect their teachers to give feedback, both positive and negative, it's not really how the real world works. People reflect on their own performance, like self-generated feedback. They also get feedback from their peers and colleagues, as well as people who have a more traditional authoritative role, like a teacher or a manager. So in the language classroom, part of feedback is related to correction. Now, it's obviously very important, but why should you, the teacher, do it all? I would suggest encourage self-correction. Students monitor their output. Often, if you give them the chance, they can pause and reformulate or correct themselves. And if that doesn't work, see if peer correction does. Maybe one of their classmates is able to help them reformulate and correct. And then if that doesn't work, you could even ask them to do some online research, use Mr. Google and find the correct form. Or you might decide it's more effective to do the correction yourself. But I think these three steps encourage self-correction, peer correction, and then teacher correction. Perhaps, I think, benefits the students more in the long run. Another key belief in this set of 10 principles is that the teacher and the learner share responsibility for what happens in the classroom. Perhaps we should think of the teacher's role as being like a project leader. They work with the team at the beginning to establish ground rules. And once these ground rules are agreed on, and again they might be created by the whole group, then all members of the team share responsibility to enforce them and put them in practice. And creating this collaborative classroom with shared responsibility and accountability has two main positive outcomes. Firstly, less work for you. And secondly, for your learners, more engagement and investment in their own learning project. And of course, as a project leader, you need to make a good first impression. You need to be clear about your expectations and desirable outcomes at the beginning. If not, you'll waste a lot of the time as the course progresses. Adult learners really need to buy into your training, and you can do this by ensuring that they're impressed by your professionalism, that you have a clear and consistent approach, and this will help them feel secure with you and trust your methods and your skills. And all this brings me to the final principle. Your business English students are people. They're not blank slates to be written on, and they're not empty vessels to be filled. They're just like you. In some cases, maybe they're more intelligent, charismatic, experienced, knowledgeable, humorous, creative, and hardworking. And in the end, the only real difference is that you speak better English. So all these principles are taken from the book The Minimax Teacher, Minimise Teacher Input and Maximise Student Output, written by Jon Taylor in 2001 from Delta Publishing. I hope you enjoyed the video and it gave you some food for thought, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel and add any comments. I will try to answer any that I received. Thanks for listening.